We're going to go over some notes here, and I really tried to write this nicely, okay, on the airplane today. Just want to show you. This is crazy. Uh, Here is Times Square. So I promise that I'm not just, you know, taking random vacations. This actually is a spy mission on the college board. And so far, I'm alive. All right, so you're going to want a blank page of Spirachi, unless we started this in class yesterday. With some of you, I did. So we are up top going to be talking about the causes of the Atlantic revolutions. Okay, and I just want you to kind of focus one spot at a time. So intellectual causes of the Atlantic revolutions, we can do this pretty quickly. We've seen this thinker, John Locke, and he introduced the idea of natural rights. He also began to introduce this concept of the social contract, which is that government's job is to protect the natural rights of citizens, those rights of life, liberty, equality, property, pursuit of happiness, that type of language. That's John Locke. It's supposed to apply to everybody. It's universal, born into us. And the government has like a contract with people that it has to use its power to protect those rights. And if it starts to fail at that, or if it starts to abuse those rights, then the people's duty, their part of the contract is they can overthrow the government. Okay, so that's an intellectual cause. Voltaire came up with freedom of religion. This is reflected in the Bill of Rights, in the American Constitution. It's reflected in the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen in the French Revolution. And then another guy who we haven't talked about, Rousseau. Rousseau brought up this idea of popular sovereignty, which just means popular, like population, that the people, they rule, they're sovereign. And so they elect representatives to enact government, but ultimately the power is in the people. So those are the intellectual causes. Okay, and you just pause me if I'm going too fast. You got to write that stuff down. All right, now the social aspect. What is going on socially that's making people overthrow these governments? Well, first of all, there are in some places rigid social hierarchies that have been stuck for, in the case of France, hundreds of years. In the case of Latin America, New Spain, a couple hundred years, the casta system. So in France, you have this weird three estates, the Estates General. You got on the top the nobility and clergy. That's the first and second estate, or I might be flipping those. Doesn't really matter. But the nobility, those are the nobles, the people that have owned tons of land for many generations. They're rich. And then the clergy, the people that work for the Catholic Church. They are a very small percentage of the population, but they kind of have the say-so, the power to, for example, exempt themselves from taxes while everyone else has to pay. And that's rigid. It's stuck. Okay, and this starts to butt up against ideas of natural rights and equality. The casta system, sort of the same deal. The Creoles, who we're going to encounter a bit more in one of our document sets, those are those people who are descended from Peninsulares, people born in Spain, but they were born in the Americas, and they have less rights than the Peninsulares. This is going to breed resentment from the Creoles toward the Peninsulares. And like I said, this goes against the Enlightenment idea of natural equality. We're born equal, we're born free. So why are these hierarchies not really giving equal freedom to all people? That's the social causes. And then finally, economic causes, taxation without representation or unfair taxation. That's going to be a common thread. You'll see it in the American Revolution, of course, but also the French Revolution. Economic restrictions like mercantilism. So remember, we read some Adam Smith last week, and he brought up this idea that government can't possibly make the economy work by controlling it. The best thing is to let the invisible hand control the economy. And it again goes to this idea of individual liberty, of freedom to use your money, purchase products from the companies that you want to purchase them from. So mercantilism is a big cause. And then finally, we haven't talked about this much, but there's this growing class of people who have some disposable income. They've got some extra money. Maybe they're business owners. I think about Benjamin Franklin. He's a successful kind of businessman, thinker guy. He's a middle class person. He's not nobility or aristocracy, but he is part of this growing class of people that have some leisure time. They've got some literacy. They're reading Enlightenment philosophers, and they're getting kind of agitated by all of these different things. Whoopsies. And so those are our causes. Okay. Where in the Jimmy Tomlinson am I? All right. So now down here, yeah, let's just do that. Down here, we've got the four revolutions. Okay. So we've got the American, the French, the Haitian, and the Latin American. And I'm going to do each box at a time so you can kind of take notes on them. All right, so let's start with the American. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because you've studied this before in school. There's also a John Green video you might get to about the American Revolution. But basically, most important things to know about the American Rev. The British are taxing the colonies, and the colonies have no representation in Great Britain to sort of influence those taxes. They just have to take whatever Great Britain gets them. And Great Britain also is putting all these monopolies in place and using mercantilism to justify extracting wealth from the colonies. Another bullet point is that in the colonies, now we're in 1776. So these colonies, Jamestown was established right at the beginning of the 1600s. These people have been here for over 100 years. They're developing a sense of, yeah, we're kind of British, but we're kind of not, are we? Like my grandpa was born here, and I was born here, so I'm not really feeling like a close sense of identification or nationalism with Britain. I feel that I'm something different. Important dates for the American Rev would be 1776, the Declaration of Independence. That's where we get that line, all men are created equal with the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's John Locke language. The Constitution comes in 1787, and the Bill of Rights, which protects like the freedom of religion, that comes in 1791. So this revolution kind of proves to the French middle class that apparently you can actually do this. You can overthrow Enlightenment countries, you can use Enlightenment ideas to overthrow a government that's not fulfilling the social contract. I guess you can do that. So they have a situation, and the situation is that the Kingdom of France is heavily in debt. One reason they're in debt is because they supported this revolution because they don't like the British. So they just wanted to see like the British lose basically to the Americans. But now the king is just in a lot of debt. He's got a lot of problems going on. And essentially he needs to fix that. He needs to start to set his books back to being balanced. So he calls together the Estates General, which I mentioned earlier. And the Estates General has this long-standing pattern of the two estates on top, the nobility and the clergy. They typically just say, hey, all right, let's vote. And let's make the third estate, which is everybody else, it's like 98% of the population, we're going to vote and we're going to make them pay the taxes. So we're going to raise taxes on them. And at the time that King Louis XVI was doing this, there was a bad grain harvest. So the price of bread was super high. There's just like a lot of issues that all come together to where this idea finally, the third estate has enough. So the third estate literally walks out of the meeting, the Estates General meeting. They walk out, they go to the tennis court there in the Palace of Versailles. They go to the tennis court and they take the tennis court oath. They basically promise that they're not going to leave Versailles until they form a new government. Okay, and so they do. They form a new government. And the French Revolution is a total, absolute mess. One of the document sets that you're going to read while I'm gone is about the Reign of Terror. Okay, so that's kind of phase 2 of the French Revolution. But I just want you to write down these phases. So first, you got the moderate phase, which is there's this National Assembly formed by the tennis court oath, and they're kind of they've got the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, and they're letting the king rule, but they're kind of checking his power. And it's just sort of like this, it's kind of like this little initial honeymoon phase of the French Revolution. Then things start to go bad. You got neighboring European states like Austria and Prussia, and they start to say, I don't really like this idea of people overthrowing. So they basically declare war on France and in support of the monarchy. And they start to attack from outside. Okay, the French Revolution freaks out and it starts to force people to fight in the war against them. And now French people inside the revolution, they're starting to say, I don't really like this. So the Reign of Terror is this response to these problems from outside of France and inside of France. And there's a whole doc set on that. So I'll let you explore that more in the doc set, this Reign of Terror period. It's not long, but it's incredibly bloody. Tens of thousands of people are killed for crimes against the revolution, most of them without anything like a fair trial or, their natural rights being protected. Okay, this Reign of Terror ends. It kind of like eats itself. The guy that led the Reign of Terror, his name was Maximilien Robespierre, and he's like the last dude to get beheaded. And so then this collection of leaders called the Directory, they take over for a period of time, 1795 to 1799. France is still getting attacked by other countries. It's still got problems within. And so that gives one of the members of the Directory, who's a very popular general by this time, that gives him the opportunity to sort of consolidate all the power around himself. And Napoleon sort of becomes this emperor of France. And he essentially wages war on all of Europe from 1799 to 1815. Okay, so that is the French Revolution. It is, I would say, by far the messiest one, certainly the longest one. I mean, 1789 to 1815 until Napoleon gets captured and something called the Congress of Vienna puts Europe back together again after Napoleon's armies have kind of like run roughshod over it. So that's your French Rev. Okay. Meanwhile, in a French colony called Saint-Domingue, you start to have problems here too, because and you'll read about this in another one of your document sets, but basically Toussaint Louverture was a slave, born a slave, but eventually was given his freedom. So he was a free person of color, or a gens de couleur. Probably mispronouncing that super bad. And basically, in the height of the French Revolution, there starts to be these slave rebellions because these people are listening to the French Revolution's rhetoric, its language about liberty and equality and fraternity, and they start to burn plantations and kill slave owners and overthrow them. And then there's a period where the French revolutionary government actually says, okay, slavery is abolished because it doesn't make sense. It's not in line with Enlightenment ideas. And then all of a sudden, Napoleon, desperate for money, he sends a huge invading force to go back to Saint-Domingue, to go here and basically take over the colony again because they need money. And so they do that, and Toussaint Louverture leads Haiti in the only ever successful slave revolt in world history. The only successful slave revolt in world history. This is the first Black republic in world history, and it absolutely terrifies slaveholders throughout the Americas. Fun fact: Napoleon basically, when Haiti successfully repels Napoleon's would-be recapturing of Haiti, Napoleon kind of gives up on the Americas, and he tries to. One example of that is he sells this big chunk of the Americas that France possessed because they won it from Spain. He sells this to the United States of America because he just needs money. So that's how we got the Louisiana Purchase. Okay, that's the Haitian Revolution in 1804. Okay, and last up, we got these Latin American revolutions. Okay, so Latin America, huge chunk of territory, goes all the way from Mexico all the way down to Argentina, and basically a lot of the countries in Latin America at this time fight against a weakened Spain for their independence. Now, why was Spain weakened? Because they had been fighting the Napoleonic Wars against Napoleon, and they just didn't have the power and the resources to when these Creoles rose up against the Peninsulares, they didn't really have the power and the resources to go and fight and consolidate that empire that's all the way across the ocean. So key figures that led this would be Simon Bolivar. He wrote a famous document called the Jamaica Letter, which we'll probably see at some point. Jose de San Martin is another one of these leaders, and Miguel Hidalgo is kind of like he's like a George Washington figure of Mexico. Okay, so all of this is basically a one-page cheat sheet. I know there's a lot on it, but it's like a one-page cheat sheet for remembering these Atlantic revolutions. And, hopefully it's helpful for you as you get into the documents. But I'm not going to talk about the documents in this video. I'll talk about those in the Stew vid. All right. Take care.